MC3 in the real world. 4. Healthcare. Where lives, dignity, fear, and cultural belief systems converge, and where communication becomes the most critical element of care. Healthcare conversations carry a weight unlike any other. They are shaped not only by information, but by fear, uncertainty, cultural expectations, power dynamics, and the deeply human desire to be understood at one's most vulnerable. The stakes are high, the emotions are raw, and the margin for misunderstanding is thin. Every word, every silence, every facial expression carries meaning far beyond its surface. In multilingual, multicultural contexts, that meaning becomes even more delicate. Healthcare professionals often speak about communication as a technical skill, explaining conditions, giving instructions, reassuring patients. But communication in healthcare is not technical, it is relational. Patients do not hear only the words. They hear the tone, the pace, the emotional climate, and the relational stance behind the words. A sentence delivered calmly can soothe. The same sentence delivered hurriedly can terrify. A moment of hesitation can be interpreted as uncertainty. A neutral face can be misread as disapproval. Communication becomes care long before treatment does. In healthcare, patients rarely communicate from a place of cognitive calm. They speak from fear, pain, hope, or confusion. Their emotional state shapes every part of the interaction. A patient receiving news, even routine news, may hear it through an internal storm. A multilingual patient may be translating not only vocabulary, but emotion, trying to filter medical terminology through fear and linguistic limitation simultaneously. Expecting clarity in this environment without MC3 level awareness is unrealistic. MC3 reveals that healthcare conversations follow unique rhythms. Patients oscillate between openness and withdrawal, between seeking and avoiding information. Trust is fragile. Power imbalances make patients cautious. Cultural beliefs shape how they interpret symptoms, authority, risk, and prognosis. A patient from a collectivist culture may seek family input before making a decision, which staff may misinterpret as indecision. A patient from a culture where authority is rarely questioned may avoid asking essential questions for fear of disrespecting the professional. A patient from a culture that prefers indirectness may hide their true level of pain. Without cultural attunement, these behaviors lead to misdiagnosis, non-compliance, or emotional distress. Healthcare is also filled with face risk moments. Patients fear being judged, misunderstood, or dismissed. When they struggle to express symptoms in a second language, they may simplify excessively, leaving out crucial details. They may nod as if they understand instructions when they do not. They may avoid clarifying out of embarrassment. A clinician trained only in procedure will miss these signs. A clinician trained in MC3 will sense the strain and adjust, slowing pace, softening tone, clarifying gently, and giving the patient permission to express without fear. Communication collapse in healthcare often happens quietly. A patient's expression changes. Their tone becomes tense. Their answers shorten. Their questions disappear. They seem agreeable, but internal doubt grows. They feel overwhelmed and retreat into silence. Staff interpret this silence differently depending on their cultural assumptions. Some read it as understanding, others as agreement, others as resistance. In reality, silence often signals emotional overload. The pace regulator and emotional buffer become vital tools here. When clinicians rush, patients' cognitive load increases. When clinicians pause, patients find space to process both meaning and emotion. When clinicians soften tone, patients relax enough to ask questions. Calmness is not a luxury, it is a clinical intervention. Healthcare communication is also shaped by linguistic asymmetry. Medical terminology is inherently complex. Even native speakers struggle to understand it. Multilingual patients face a triple burden: decoding unfamiliar terms, translating them internally, and regulating fear. When a clinician asks, "Are you managing your symptoms?" the multilingual patient may not fully grasp managing ward symptoms, but may say yes to avoid appearing incapable. These micro-misunderstandings accumulate and can have real consequences. MC3 reframes healthcare communication not as a transfer of information, but as a co-regulated, culturally mediated experience. The goal is not merely to inform but to hold the patient's emotional state steady enough for comprehension to occur. This requires awareness of cultural beliefs around illness. For example, some cultures view pain expression as weakness. Others view it as necessary honesty. Some see questioning a doctor as disrespectful. Others see it as essential to informed decision-making. Some prefer family-led decision-making. Others prefer individual autonomy. Without understanding these patterns, clinicians misinterpret behavior. A patient who avoids eye contact may be showing respect, not fear. A patient who speaks at length may not be rambling but giving contextual narrative essential in their culture. A patient who declines treatment may not be refusing care but requires family consensus. The thread keeper becomes essential when patients express symptoms through fragmented storytelling, a common pattern across cultures. Clinicians must extract the core meaning without dismissing the narrative. Patients feel safer when their story is honored, not streamlined prematurely. Healthcare also involves high emotional contagion. Patients sense when clinicians are rushed, overwhelmed, or fatigued. They adjust their own behavior accordingly, speaking less, asking fewer questions, or withholding concerns. The clinician may believe the interaction is efficient, the patient may leave uninformed and anxious. Calm presence from the clinician becomes an emotional anchor. Service recovery in healthcare, when something goes wrong, or when a patient feels dismissed, requires extraordinary sensitivity. Unlike retail or hospitality, the emotional stakes are existential. Patients may fear pain, disability, or death. Restoring trust requires more than apology. It requires acknowledging the emotional rupture without intensifying it, creating space for the patient's voice, and reaffirming safety through tone, clarity, and stability. Old narratives in healthcare focus on breaking bad news. MC3 reframes it as holding emotional truth. Patients can tolerate difficult information when they feel emotionally supported. They collapse only when the emotional environment becomes too thin to hold the weight of the meaning. Especially in multilingual contexts, family involvement becomes a communication variable. Families may translate inaccurately, softening information, omitting details, or reshaping meaning according to cultural norms. Clinicians must navigate this respectfully, balancing professional accuracy with cultural compassion. The expectation frame and clarity anchor help align family and clinical roles without confrontation. When healthcare professionals apply MC3, the transformation is profound. Patients feel seen as humans, not tasks. Misdiagnoses decrease because information becomes more accurate. Compliance improves because instructions are understood, not merely heard. Emotional distress reduces because patients feel safe. Trust grows because communication becomes relational rather than transactional. Healthcare is often seen as a science supported by communication. MC3 reveals the opposite: communication is the foundation on which clinical science rests. Without clarity, understanding, dignity, and trust, even the best medical interventions falter. The next chapter, Education, explores another environment where power, learning, identity, and culture collide, and where MC3 reshapes the way teachers and learners understand one another. Case: the patient who underreported pain. A nurse in an Irish hospital cared for a Chinese patient recovering from surgery. Every time she asked about pain, the patient smiled faintly and said, "I'm fine." But his body told a different story: tight shoulders, shallow breathing, guarded movements. He didn't believe pain should be expressed publicly. In his cultural logic, to do so would make him appear weak and burdensome. Once a translator joined briefly and reframed the question as, "Where in your body is the discomfort living today?" his answer changed. He described the pain with surprising honesty. He hadn't been hiding the pain. He had been protecting dignity. In healthcare, symptom accuracy depends on emotional and cultural safety long before it depends on language. Scenario practice: the understatement of pain. Ask multilingual patients, "Where in your body is the discomfort living today?" instead of "Are you in pain?" Watch how the honesty changes.